Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Kaf Dalid. Today we're going to talk about when an owner causes an injury to a slave in his eye or his tooth, the Torah says. What about other injuries? We're going to talk all about that. But first, we have a follow-up conclusion to a machloket that we saw on the previous daf between Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan. Rabbi Meir says that if a third party gives something to a slave, then it goes to the owner, no matter what. Even if he says, it's a gift to you, on condition that it's yours, doesn't matter. According to the Bimei, always. And the same is true for someone that gives a third party gives something to a wife. The wife takes it, it's automatically acquired by the husband. Same law, no matter what. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbanan, however, said, if the third party says, here, this is yours on condition that it's a gift to you and it doesn't go to the owner, or it's on condition that this will be for your emancipation, and it's not going to go to the, and it's not going to be a gift that goes directly to the owner. If you add a condition, Rabbanan says that a slave can acquire something that way, and the same would be also true for a wife. Even though if you just give it to her, it's going to go to her husband. If you say a condition, then that will in fact stay hers. Good. That's what we saw so far. Now we bring a contradiction. V'rameh, Rabbi Meir ad Rabbi Meir, v'rameh, Rabbanan ad Rabbanan. We see in the following braita that both of their opinions are contradicted. Der Tanya, en isha poda maaser sheni belo chomesh. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer mishum Rabbi Meir, isha poda maaser sheni belo chomesh. First, let's explain what we're talking about. Maaser sheni is the maaser that a farmer gives in the first and second, fourth and fifth year. That has to be in Yerushalayim. If he lives far from Yerushalayim, he can redeem it for money and then use the money to buy food in Jerusalem, and he can eat the food. Now, if you redeem it, the Torah says that you have to add a fifth. We see that in the pasuk right here. Ve'im ga'ol yigal ish mima'asro hamishito Yosef alav. If a man redeems his produce, his maaser, he takes maaser. If he redeems that maaser, doesn't want to carry that fruit itself, then he has to add a fifth. Adding a fifth means a fifth of the total. So that would be 20, he has to add 25%. So if you have 100 and you add 25, you get 125. 25 is a fifth of 125. So we would say it's a quarter. In the Torah's ratios, it's a fifth. Okay, he has to add a fifth. Now here's the halacha. You only have to add a fifth if you're the one redeeming your own produce. Or if you ask a shaliach to redeem produce with your own money, also you have to add a fifth. But if I come and take my money and I redeem your produce with my money, then you do not have to add a fifth. That's the general rule. Now we're going to apply this to a husband and wife. The Tanna Kamai here says that a woman cannot redeem maaser sheni without paying a chomesh, a double negative. It means she does have to pay. She does have to add the chomesh if she redeems her husband's produce. The idea is that she and her husband are one. Her husband's produce and money are the same as hers. They are like one. So it's the same as if the husband did it, he would have to pay a fifth. So too, if the wife did it, she has to pay a fifth. That's Tanna Kama. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, in the name of Rabbi Meir, so this represents Rabbi Meir, says that a wife does not have to, if she's redeeming it, she doesn't have to add a fifth. She's like a separate person. It would be the same as me doing it for you, two totally different people. The wife does it for her husband without a fifth. Now we analyze. If you're talking about a case where it's the money of the husband and it's the produce of the husband, well then it's like a shaliach. She's acting on his behalf, using his produce, using his money. Certainly, you would have to add a fifth. We can't explain that. We could not explain it Meir in that way. So rather, is it talking about her own money and his produce? But in that case, the pasuk, remember, it said ish, a man. Now the truth is that a man has to add a fifth. A woman, if she's using her own money for her own produce, let's say she's single, then she also has to add a fifth. But this word ish teaches us specifically that if a wife is using her money and doing it on behalf of her husband, she does not have to add a fifth. And so then it would be impossible to explain Tanakama, who says you have to add a fifth. So what is the case? Because so is it not that we're talking about a case where a third party gives the wife money and says, here is money, I want you to take it, on condition that you'll use it to redeem the produce that you have over there, your husband's produce. Now, if this is the case, we end up with a contradiction, because let's take Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said, in all cases, slave or wife, sorry, we're comparing them again, if a third party gives something to the wife, it automatically goes to the husband, does not pass go, does not even go into her property. And so therefore, it goes straight to him. So in this case, when someone gives her the money, really it's the husband's. Since it belongs to the husband, certainly when she goes and takes her husband's property, produce, with her husband's money, she acquired it, but it goes straight to her husband, then certainly she would have to take a fifth, according to the Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir's one said that she doesn't have to take a fifth. So we have a contradiction between the two statements of Rabbi Meir. And on the other side, according to Rabbanan, if you say a statement like this, I'm giving you money, the third party says, on condition that you'll use it for ma'aser, the Rabbanan said, then that works, and she maintains control of that money, and so it's hers that she can use for redemption, but she's using her own money to redeem the husband's produce. And we just said that when she uses her own money to do the husband's produce, she does not have to give a fifth. And yet Rabbanan here at the beginning says she has to take the fifth. Right, sorry for the pun. And so she does have to take a fifth of it. And so now we don't know what to do with this contradiction. And we have an answer. Amar Abaye epuch. Abaye says you have to reverse the opinions in this baraita. In fact, Rabbi Meir is the one that says the first opinion that you have to take a fifth, and the Rabbanan are the ones that said no, she can take it without the fifth, and that would resolve the contradiction. Okay, that's an easy way to do it. But Ravas Amad leolam lo tepuch. Ravas says I can leave it as is. The tradition was taught in this way. There must be some wisdom behind it. Let's figure it out. This we're talking about a case of produce, not the husband's produce that he had from his own field, but rather produce that she got from her father's house, right? While she's married, her father died, she gets an inheritance. So this is her money. Now, while they're married, the husband will control it, but it's really her land. Her produce, if it's produce, and he'll take it, he'll buy land with it. Okay, so it's basically her stuff. Now, what about the tithe that comes from that produce that comes to her by an inheritance? What's the status of the ma'aser? That is the subject of the machloket. In other words, the point is, this has nothing to do with the third party giving money to her, saying this is yours on condition that you use for pigeon. If that were the case, we would have a contradiction. But it's not talking about third party, not talking about a condition. Forget that whole thing. What we're talking about here is something that she gets as an inheritance, which is certainly hers. But what about the maaser? Whose is it? Rabbi Meir in general says about maaser sheni that maaser sheni is hekdesh. Now, usually when something's hekdesh, a typical hekdesh is this belongs to Bet HaMikdash. I can't use it at all. But maaser sheni is an interesting type of hekdesh. Even though it's holy, I'm allowed to use it. I just have to do it in Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem is a holy space. If I come to Jerusalem, then we can enjoy it there. But really it is hekdesh and doesn't belong to me or you or any human being. It belongs to Hashem. It belongs to the Bet HaMikdash. And therefore, the husband never acquires it. So what's going on here? She gets this produce, she takes a tenth, and now she wants to redeem it. She's using her husband's money to redeem the hekdesh that belongs to the Bet HaMikdash. And so therefore, this is not the same person. This is the same as me redeeming your produce, and I don't have to take hekdesh. That explains Rabbi Meir. That's why Rabbi Meir says up here that she does not have to take hekdesh. She's using her husband's money for God's food, and that's two different parties. You don't need to take hekdesh. ורבנן לטעמיהו דאמרי ממון הג'ותו וכני לבעל הלקח שליחותה דבעל כעבדה. Rabbanan, however, say regarding Maaser Sheni in general, that if it belongs to human beings, even though I took all my produce here and I separated a tenth, this tenth has a special status, it has a restriction. I'm not allowed to eat it here in Yafo or in Haifa. I have to bring it to Yerushalayim and eat it there. So it is restricted food, but it's not holy in the sense of that it belongs to God. It belongs to a human being. Therefore, when she inherits this, the food, the produce, so yes, it's hers, but because she's married, so it transfers to her husband. As long as they're married, the husband is in control of that, and then he's supposed to sell it if it's a movable item and buy land so that it's more stable, and that's in her interest. But basically, the husband does own the ma'aser. So when she takes money, her husband's money, to take ma'aser on her husband's, I know she got it and as inheritance, but now he's in control of it. So now it's her husband's produce. So that requires maaser, because she is only a shaliach of the husband, which requires it, and that's Rabbanan. That was the first opinion in the Braita that requires maaser. And so amazingly, Abaye said, "Oh, just switch them." Right, easy solution. But Rava said, hold on, look into it further. And we can see that it's actually the subject here is a completely different machloket about the nature of Maaser Sheni, and is able to leave the text intact and explain their reasoning in this way. Fantastic. Okay, now, Baraita, Tana. Yoseh Beshen ve'ayin ve'rashe barim she'enan chozrim. We're talking about Eved Kanaani. He leaves. He can get his freedom with an eye, with a tooth or an eye, if the owner knocks it out, or any other extremities, any limbs that don't grow back. All right, so that'll be the same if he got a finger cut off, a leg cut off, anything like that. If it doesn't grow back, then he leaves. This would not be true for, let's say, he just gets a cut or something and it's going to heal. Then he doesn't get his freedom. Now, now we understand a tooth and an eye. It says that explicitly in the pasuk. Let's look at the pasuk inside. It says, "V'chi yakeh ish et ayin abdo ot en ayin amato v'shihataha lachofshi yishalechenu tachat ayno." If the owner hits the eye of his eved, a male or female, and destroys it, then they go free because of his eye, on account of the eye. That's all one pasuk. Second pasuk then continues, Ve'im shenavdo or shenamato yapil, if he knocks out his tooth, his or her tooth, yapil lachofshi yishalechenu tachat shino. So you have two separate pasukim, one for eye, one for tooth. So those are obvious. It says it in the pasuk. But other limbs, how do you know? What's your source that if the owner damages other limbs, the slave goes free? The answer is Dumya deshen ve'ayin mashen ve'ayin mumin shebegaloi ve'enan chozrin afkol mumin shebegaloi ve'enan chozrin. The Torah is giving you examples. It's not saying these and only these. It's saying anything that's similar to a tooth and an eye. What do they have in common? Number one, they're exposed. You look at a person with no eye, you could see, right? There's not an internal wound. Teeth, if your mouth is closed, maybe you can't tell, but people smile, and you can see, where your tooth is missing. And so this is exposed and it does not regenerate. So anything that's exposed and doesn't regenerate, so that would include, right, any limbs, anything like that, the slave would go free. Now, we have a rule about binyan av. Binyan av means a paradigm. If you have one example of the Torah gives you one example of something, we can say that as a paradigm. It gave you one example, but it means that you should generalize to anything that is like it. But when the Torah gives two examples, then we say that Torah is being precise. It's saying two because only those two. If it wanted to say anything like them, it would say only one of them, and I can expand. By mentioning two, it means only those two. So why don't we say Shen and Ayin? That's what the Torah says. and therefore we cannot learn anything else from it, and no other injury would lead to freedom. And so katab lachamana shen hava amina afilu shen de halab katab lachamana ayin. We're going to explain why the Torah needs to say those two examples, because if I only had one, I wouldn't be able to figure out the other. So if you can explain why the Torah gave those two examples, then and why one doesn't cover the other, then you can generalize from those two to other similar examples. So here it is. If the Torah only said tooth, I would think that a slave goes free even if the master knocked out just a baby tooth. Now, see, baby tooth can, even if it falls out, the next one will grow. And so I might have thought, yes, you go out for a tooth, means any tooth, even a baby tooth. That's why the Torah comes and adds an eye. Well, you only get one set of eyes. So it has to be something that's similar to an eye. A baby tooth, he would not go free for. So that's why I needed to say eye. Of course, and if the Torah only said I would say a slave only goes free for a damage to a limb that he was created with, that was there at the time that he was born, but not a tooth. When the baby was born, the baby had no teeth. Therefore, if the owner knocks out a tooth of the slave, even when he's 50 years old and it's an adult tooth, you could say, well, you weren't born with a tooth, so you're not worse than you were born. Maybe it has to be like an eye that you're born with, I might have thought. So therefore, it has to say tooth also, that's included, even though a person is not born with teeth. So since I need both, because each one has a problem that the other one doesn't include, therefore, both of them together I need, and we can generalize to all other limbs that do not regenerate and that are exposed. So far, so good. Ve'ema ki yakeh kelal, shen ve'ayin perat, kelal uprat, en ba kelal ela ma sheba perat, shen ve'ayin in mida harini la. Hold on, we were concentrating only now so far just on tooth and eye, but the pasuk starts with ki yakeh ish. Now, ki yakeh ish is a generalization. If a owner strikes his slave, and so I might think strike in any way, any injury, that's a kalal. And then shen and ayin in this pasuk and the next pasuk are details. Here's the rule: whenever you have a generality followed by detailed examples, you only have the parat. It's kind of like saying, if I say, get me a drink, orange juice, what I mean by that is I only want orange juice. If I say, get me a drink, orange juice, and you bring me apple juice, so I said orange juice. You're not going to say you said a drink. I know I started with a drink. I was introducing, but I mean the last thing, only the detail. So if I read it in that way, then that would mean only a shen and ayin and not any other limb. So how come you don't read it using that rule? The answer is lachovshi yishalachenu chazar vechalal. Right at the end of the pasuk says lachovshi yishalachenu. Says it again here, lachovshi yishalachenu. And so that is a generality. He goes free. So that's another klal. Now we have klal, perat uklal. That works differently. Atadan ela ka'ayna perat. There you have to take something that's similar in an essential way to the detail. So it's not only those two examples, but something that is similar, that has a similar characteristic that's essential to the law. Now it's not clear usually what is that particular characteristic that these examples are paradigms of. So that's what we're going to discuss now. Now, ma perat meforash mum shebagaloi ve'enan chozrim afkol mum shebagaloi ve'enam chozrim. So what's distinctive about an eye and a tooth? Well, both of them are exposed and they don't regenerate. So that's what we're going to learn. It's not any injury. The klal, you might think any injury. The examples tell us no, it's more limited. But I'm not limited only to these two, but anything that's similar to it. So far, so good. Hold on, I can maybe limit it even further, add another characteristic, because shen and ayin both, yes, they're exposed, and they don't grow back, but also it causes a person not to be able to function properly. If you don't have an eye, right, then you can't. If you can't see or can't see well, then there's certain things you won't be able to do. If you don't have teeth, then you won't be able to eat or use your teeth to cut something. So there's lots of things that you won't be able to do without a tooth or without teeth. And so maybe it has to be something that also causes a problem of regular functioning. And maybe if it's just a pinky toe got cut off a little, it doesn't change your functioning. You can still walk and run, and so that would be excluded, right? So how do you know? Why not? Maybe we should add this characteristic as another limitation. And if you say, yeah, we should do that, alama tanya tanash bizkano v'dirder bo asem ayabed yoseh bahem necharut lachofshi yishalachenu ribuyahu. We have a baraita that says if the owner pulled on the beard of the slave and caused his jawbone to be dislocated, he goes free, even though this is something that will not ruin his function. I mean, maybe he'll be a little crooked or uncomfortable, but he could still do everything. The Braita says he does go free. So how did you? So we know that we have to exclude Batel Melachto, but if we look at the characteristics of these two things, they both cause a problem of functioning. So how come he does go free? For this jawbone, which does not have a problem of functioning, the answer is lachofshi shalachenu ribuyahu. The klal, right, that says, and it says it twice after all, is an amplification. That's an expansion. Even though you're right, both shin and ayin, he can function, but the power of the klal and that extra lachofshi shalachenu comes to say, you know what? Even though both of those things have a problem of function, that's not an essential characteristic. Even if there's an injury that does not have a problem of basic functioning, still he does go free. Okay. Now hold on. You just told me there's an amplification that includes more cases. Once you're going to start including more cases, I could suggest other cases that should be included and should be able to go free. For example, if the master strikes the slave on his hand and causes it to become paralyzed temporarily, but he'll get better. So this would be like a case of something that can regenerate. So maybe I should include that also, because the pasuk says he will go free. And even though an eye and a tooth don't regenerate, okay, but we have an amplification that includes more things, and so he should go free even for something that will get better. But we know that's not true. The Baraita specifically says if he hits him on his hand and it withers and it becomes paralyzed, but it'll get better, he does not go free. So how come you didn't include that? And the answer is if you're going to include something that grows back, then what's the point of giving the examples of eye and tooth, right? The point of the examples is to say it is limited, and it's limited by things that are like that. They're like that because these are both items that are exposed and they will not grow back. So to anything that grows and will not grow back. You see here, there is some subjectivity in trying to figure out, well, what's the essential characteristics of these? Because there's many ways in which eye and a tooth are the same, are similar, but could be not similar to lots of other things. So there's many categories that one could propose, but in the end, this is part of the oral law to know and figure out what's that essential character that makes these different and more serious than other types of injuries that would be worthy for a slave going free because he got these injuries. Good. Now, Tenor Banan. Bechulam ebed yoseh bahem lecherut v'sarich get shichrut Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, even though when the master strikes the slave and does any of these injuries, he goes free, still we require the master to give him a writ of emancipation. He still has to give him a get. In other words, this is the injury is for for cause, right? This is a determination that he deserves to go free, but he doesn't automatically go free. He still, the Bet Din says, okay, well, you did this, now you have to let him go, now you have to write a get, according to the Bishimon. Rabbi Meir says, Omer, and no sarich. Rabbi Meir says, no, you don't have to. The second that he knocks out his eye or any other limb, that itself causes the freedom. That triggers the freedom. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to write anything. This is a big machloket among a lot of Tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer omer sarich. Rabbi Torfan omer eno sarich. Rabbi Akiva omer sarich. So you have the Tanaim are split. Some of them say you have to write a get. Some say you don't have to write a get. Hamachriim lefnei chachamim omerim. But there was some group of sages that decide before the sages. Right, so they have to come to some conclusion among this multi-headed machloket, and they decided, to make a compromise. Nid'im divrei Rabbi Tarfon b'shen ve'ayin shatorah zachta bo. Rabbi Tarfon, he's the one that said eno sarich. You don't have to write a get. It seems he's right when it comes to an eye and a tooth, because the Torah says that explicitly. So you don't need anything else. The Torah, nothing more powerful than the Torah says eye and tooth. You knock those out, they go free. That person goes free automatically. You don't need a get. Whereas for other limbs, right, not chopped off his hand or something, then you have to write a get, because that's not explicit in the Torah. This is a penalty that the rabbis added. It's the rabbis themselves that said, well, what should we include? What's similar to an eye and a tooth? The Torah doesn't say. The rabbis had to say, you know what? The Torah says eye and a tooth. We think that is deserving also for other limbs, right? Because they're also just as serious. They're similar in these essential ways. So it's the rabbis that added them on. Because the rabbis added these categories, the slave doesn't go free automatically. It's grounds for emancipation, but the owner has to give a get in order for them to go free. Now this is an astounding statement, and the Gemara says, "Knasu kerei kadashinan." What do you mean it's a knas, which sounds like it's only a derabanan, that the rabbis are saying, okay, this is grounds, we're adding this as a derabanan law. Really? But it's a mikra, it's a Torah pasuk that we made a derashah on. I mean, there's, how many laws are learned from a derashah? So many of them, most of them, everything is learned from a derashah. There are explicit things also, but I don't know what percent it is exactly, but I don't know, maybe 20% of the laws that we know are explicit in the Torah, and I'm making up numbers, but something much bigger than that are learned from derashot, that you make whatever, gezerah shava, hekesh, Binyan Av, Klal Uprat Uklal. So we learned it through the basic midah Shatorah Nidreshet Bahem. So it's not a Knas Chachamim. It should be considered a Deoraita. Ela Ho'il Umidrash Chachamim. That's what we meant to say. Not Knas Chachamim. Knas Chachamim sounds like it's really just a Rabbanan. But Midrash Chachamim, yeah, I know. We learned it from the Torah. So therefore you're right. It has a Deoraita status. Something that's learned from the Torah does have a Deoraita status. Still, it's not quite the same as something that's explicit in the Torah. This is really an astounding and very, very important statement. We have to come back to this often, because so many times the Gemara just kind of assumes one way or another. It doesn't address this question explicitly. This is a fundamental machloket between Rambam and Ramban in the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvot, the second shoresh of what to count and what not to count. Rambam says, just because you learn it from the rabbis learn it from a derashah, doesn't mean it's necessarily one of the 613. It's not necessarily a deoraita. Could be that they're just learning it as an asmachta, just as a hint, just to give it authority. And Ramban there says, what are you talking about? How many? Like you're undermining all the Pesukim, all the laws that we learned from Pesukim, from Derashot, right? No, they're all in the Torah. They should count them all as a 613. If it learns from a Derashah, then it is deoraita. It's an essential part. So this is subject of a huge machloket that has a lot of ramifications. I think what you see here is that this Gemara is saying that although It's not knas that we call it Rabbanan. It is deoraita. Nevertheless, a very important distinction. There is still a fundamental distinction between something explicit in the Torah, that's the peshat of the Torah. In another place, the Gemara says, how do you know what's the peshat of the Torah? Something that the Sadokim would say. Right? We actually, amazingly, using a category, if the Sadokim say it, then okay, we'll call it the Peshat of the Torah. That has a level of authority that is greater than something that's learned that from the Midrash. Even though it's also Deoraita, still, that has rabbinic input into what to define, how big, how small. It's still based on the Midrash, such that the first category doesn't require a get. It's so obvious. The second one does. Some of the commentaries here try to explain why there would be a difference between the two, and say as follows: since it says in Torah Shen and Ayin, and obviously everybody knows the Pesukim. So if you see a slave going around and he's missing an eye, and you say, oh, missing an eye, that's why he went free. So everybody would know that he went free because he's missing an eye or missing a tooth, because they know the Pesukim. Everybody knows the Pesukim by heart. But if he's missing a hand and people don't know the Torah Shebaal Peh, then not everybody's doing Daf Yomi. And so they see a slave, even though he doesn't have a hand, he said, wait a second, you should be a slave. What are you doing walking around free? And then they'll give him a hard time. So therefore, to prevent that misunderstanding, we say, give him a get. Even though it's a Doraita law, nevertheless, give him a get so that no one will give him a problem. Someone that may not know the Derashot of Chachamim, since it's not as obvious, so that needs a little extra proof on behalf of the slave. Okay, so let's remember this sugya in the future whenever we want to discuss what is the status of Midrash Chachamim. My Tamad Rabbi Shimon. Now regarding this, what is the reason for Rabbi Shimon? He's the one that said you require get shichrur. What's his source? Yalif shiluach me'isha. Ma'isha bishtar af ebed hame bishtar. He says, both regarding a slave and a woman, it says, send her away, right? V'shilha mi beto, regarding divorce. And so, just like regarding divorce, it has to be with a get, so too, anytime a slave is going free, even if it's for cause, just like with a wife, even if there's some cause that requires divorce, let's say that's a prohibited marriage, nevertheless, it doesn't automatically pop out. You have to give a get. So too regarding emancipation of a slave, even if there's grounds for emancipation, you still actually have to give one. Remember, Rabbi Shimon, the Tanaim themselves said it across the board. Either all of them they need a get, or none of them need a get. It's only the compromisers that were deciding the halacha. They made this compromise here. So Rabbi Shimon says across the board, even for Shen and Ayin, you need a shtar. Rabbi Meir, katav chofshi lebasof kedeka'amart, hashta dekatav lachofshi yeshalechenu, havale chofshi me'ikara. Rabbi Meir says, listen, if the pasuk said chofshi only, then I would agree with you that you need a get. But the pasuk says lachofshi and yeshalechenu, that double the force of those two words together teaches us that automatically, as soon as the owner knocks out his tooth, that itself triggers his freedom, and you don't need to get. That's all. That's what we can learn from that extra word. Good. So now the obvious law is that yes, if the owner struck his slave on an eye and caused him to be blind, or his ear and caused him to be deaf, certainly he will go free. That's obvious. Neged, this is the eye is obvious, and the ear also. This is something that will not grow back, and it's going to be evident. And so this is worthy of his getting his freedom. Neged aino ve'eno ro'eh. Keneged ozno ve'eno shomea en ayebed yoseh behen lechirut. However, if the master caused the injury indirectly, he struck somewhere near his eye, and somehow, because not on his eye directly, but near his eye, and knocked something out of place, maybe his optic nerve or whatever, and he can't see. Or if he hit something near his ear, made a loud noise or something, caused an injury in some indirect way, then he does not get his freedom, even though there is an injury, but it was not caused directly by hitting the eye itself or the ear itself. That's the Braita. Amar Rav Shemen Rav Asher. Lememra de kala lav kilumhu. So Rav Shemen asked Rav Asher, are you telling me that a sound that causes damage is not considered anything? We're assuming here that what was the injury to the ear was caused by some loud sound, right? He banged on the wall, made a loud sound right near his ear and caused him injury. So you say that's indirect, and therefore he's not responsible. So is that the reason why you're saying he's not responsible, or at least that he doesn't go free? Hold on. Let's say your rooster sticks his head into my glass vessel and he crows into it, makes a loud cock-a-doodle-doo, and breaks it. And now he didn't break it by banging it, he broke it by sound. You have to pay full amount. Amarav Yosef, Amri Berav, Sus Shesana, V'chamosh Shena'ar, V'shabru Kelim B'toch HaBayit, V'shalamin Hasi Nezek. Or, let's say your horse was in my house and it neighed, or your donkey brayed, and they made such a loud noise, they broke some vases in my house, so you have to pay half the damage. Let's say it's a tam animal, doesn't do this usually, but now today it was unusually loud and wild, so you have to pay half. What does this show? That causing damage by sound is called damage, and therefore if the owner makes a very loud noise right next to the slave's ear, so that's like direct damage, and the slave should go free. How do you explain this? And the answer is injury to a vase, a vessel, is different from injury to a person. The sound waves that I cause, or my animal caused, that are so strong that they break a vessel, that I'm responsible for. But when it comes to a person was not, according to this anyway, I'm not sure if this is medically sound, excuse the pun, but the idea here is that it's not the sound itself that caused the person to go deaf, but rather that became frightened. And if he was more brave and wasn't so frightened, then he wouldn't go deaf. And so when it comes to the slave, it's his own fault, right? He should have been more brave and said, okay, it's a sound, it's all right, it's no big deal. But his problem was, he heard a loud sound, he got so frightened, and his fear caused him to go deaf. So the owner can say, that's indirect, that's not my problem, he should have been more courageous. Kedetanya, amavit et chavero patur midinei adam v'chayav b'dinei shamayim. Kesa taka be'ozno v'cheresho patur, achazahu v'taka be'ozno v'cheresho chayav. And we can prove this from a braita that says if someone frightens someone else, he is patur from in a bet din, in the human court. You can say, I hid behind the door and I frightened you. I made you so scared that you had an injury. Well, I say that's too indirect. Even though chayav b'dei shamayim, so in heaven they'll say, you shouldn't have done that and scared them and caused that. But in a human legal court, you can't prove that I caused him direct damage. This is too indirect that I caused him to be scared. And what's an example? If I shouted into someone's ear and caused him to be deaf, exempt. We're talking about you're shouting in a way that caused them to be scared. Maybe there is a distinction between, I'm sure there could be a sound that's so loud, no matter who you are, or what you're thinking, or how courageous you are, those sound waves will cause actual damage to the eardrum. But maybe in a case what this is talking about is that it's not so much from the loudness of the sound, but from the fear. It just jumps and something happens that knocks something loose in his ear, or in his body, and he gets an injury from that. So therefore, if it's only from being scared of the sound, he's exempt. But if one guy should hold on and actually shout in his ear and deafens him, then he is liable because he's holding on to him. So that holding on to him and shouting in his ear, well, that's the other kind, right? That's direct injury, even though it's on account of sound, but the combination of physically taking hold of him and shouting into his ear, that's not just because of the fear, that is called direct damage. To apply this conclusion back to the slave, if the owner just makes a loud noise near the slave and causes him to be scared and he goes deaf, that is not grounds for emancipation. However, if he grabs him and yells in his ear directly, then he would go free, because that would be called direct injury, that physical contact, combined with directly into his ear. That's just not because of fright. That's a direct injury. All right, next. Al eino v'chihata al shino v'nadeda im yachol ishtamesh behen achshav en ayebed yoseh behen lecharut ve'im lav ayebed yoseh behen lecharut. If the master hits his eye and doesn't cause him complete blindness, but his vision becomes weak, or he hits his tooth and the tooth gets loose but doesn't fall out, well, then we see if he can still use it. He can use it somewhat. He doesn't go free, right? He caused it to be weak, but not totally gone, so that then it doesn't go free. But if it's not usable anymore, he's like, so his eyesight, he can see something, but it's so weak that he can't, it's not useful at all, or that his tooth, even though it's attached, he can't chew anything on it. It's so weak, it's probably better that if it wasn't there. It's more painful to have a loose tooth than no tooth. So if not, then he does go free. Even though it's not totally gone, still it's not usable, so he goes free. That's one baraita. A second baraita, Tanya idach. Hare shaita eino chehuya v'simea, shino neduda ve'pila, im yachol ishtamesh ben kevar, eved yoseh ben lecherut, v'im lav, en eved yoseh ben lecherut. So this is now, the other way around. If his eye already was weak, he had very, very low vision, or his tooth was already loose, and the owner then made him either completely blind or knocked it out totally, well, then it depends. If it was usable before, even though he had very bad eyesight, but it was still usable, he could still helped him get around, and now he caused him complete blindness, he goes free. And if his loose tooth was a little loose, but it was still usable, and he knocks it out, then he goes free. But if it was not useful before, that his eyesight was so bad, it didn't help him at all, and his tooth was so loose he couldn't chew on it at all, then he does not go free, because it's as if it was not there beforehand. Now we say, Usiricha. It seems that both of these braitot are telling us the same thing, right? If something is useful, then it's like it's there. And if something is not useful, then it's like it's not there. So why do I need both of these braitot? And the answer is, Di ashmoinan kakamaita, vishum de mikara nehora bari, vashta nehora kechisha. If I only had the first one, I would say the key thing there, the reason why he goes free is because at first he was healthy, and he brought him down to a point that he was so weak that he couldn't use it. That's where he goes free. But I might say that's only because he only goes free in that case because he had full health. But if it was already not such great vision, or a little loose, even if it was usable, but it was already problematic and now it's gone, so I might say maybe he doesn't go free then, because he wasn't so healthy to begin with. And so if it was already kind of sick and he just made it worse, maybe he wouldn't go free. So that's why I need the second braita that tells me that if it goes from weakness, even though it's usable, to nothing, that also is considered an injury. And if I only had the second braita, I would say that in those cases where, he had weak vision, but it was still useful, and now he made him totally blind, that's when you go free, if you make him totally blind or take out his tooth totally. But in the first case, if he could still see, right, a little bit, his tooth is still there, I might say he doesn't go free. So that's why I need both of them to tell me that it doesn't matter whether you're bringing him from full health to weakness or weakness to nothing. The point is, if you're changing it from something useful to not useful, or useful to not at all, then he goes free in both of those cases. What if the master is an eye doctor and the slave has an eye problem, and he says, goes to the doctor, he says, can you put this medicine in my eye? Kechol is also what's used for eyeshadow, blue eyeshadow. So you're taking something and putting medicine in the eye with some kind of Q-tip or something, and while he's doing it, the master, who's a doctor, right, he slips and he causes his slave to go blind. Or let's say his master is a dentist and he says, oh, I have a toothache, can you fix my tooth? So he's drilling his tooth, right, fixing his cavity, and in the end the master knocks out his tooth. Not because he's trying to injure him, he's actually trying to heal him. Shichek ba'adon v'yasa lecharut. So in those two cases, the slave can laugh at his master and say, I know you were trying to help me, but you knocked out my eye, you knocked out my tooth, now I go free. That's Tanakama says, you go free. Rashbag, however, says, no, it says, and destroy it. Only if the master intends to destroy it. He's hitting him because he's angry, he wants him to be injured. That's when he goes free. But if you're trying to help, you don't, then it doesn't go free, right? If you're, if you go to a doctor and he tries to help you, but in the end, it doesn't work. So, it's not the doctor's fault. He was trying his best to save your tooth, but it got knocked out. So only if one means to cause injury, if he means to help, then the slave does not go free, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, Rabbanan, the pasuk says to destroy it. What are you going to do with that pasuk? Rabbi Elazar Omer, Haresh Yoshit Yado l'me'ay shivchato, v'simeh ubar shem b'me'ayha patur. My ta'amad amar kera v'shichata ad shechaven le'shachata. So we need the word v'shachata, according to Rabbanan, for this halakha of Rabbi Elazar, that if he has a maidservant and she's giving birth, and the master is helping her to give birth, and he puts his hand into her womb to try to get the fetus out, she's having trouble, and by mistake he causes an injury to the fetus's eye and blinds the fetus. Patur, the fetus, the mother, does not go free. Why? Because it says to destroy it, and so it means he has to intend to destroy it. In this case, it's not only that he was trying to help the mother and the fetus, he didn't know where his hands were going to his eye at all. It was total mistake. Yechaven, at least could have aim and direct your attention to something in particular. In the case of the eye doctor and the dentist, okay, they were working on that thing. At least they were aiming for it. So he does go free, but here he's just helping the fetus, and he doesn't even realize that he's touching the fetus's eye. So that's what Rabbanan used with you. That's how Rabbanan learned this halacha. Now Rashbag doesn't agree with this halacha. Where is he going to learn this? He can learn it from the extra letter. The he could have just said shichet shichata. La darish. But Rabbanan say no, we're not learning anything from that extra letter. You need it for the context that he destroys it. And so it's only in this more limited case where he had no aim at all, was not even trying to touch that limb, that the fetus remains a slave. But if he was intending to do something to his eye or his tooth, even if he was trying to help it, but it gets knocked out, according to Rabbanan, the slave nevertheless goes free. My Let's say the slave is already blind. Right, but he has an eye. His eyeball is there intact. It just doesn't work. And then the master comes and removes the eye. Now he has a hole. Doesn't even have an eye. He goes free. Why? Because he's missing a limb. Right, just like anything else. A finger it was there before. Now it's not there. It doesn't matter if it was usable, if he was using it or not, if it could movable or not. So he had a limb. He had an eye, and now it's not there. It doesn't matter whether he could see with it or not. Vetana tuna. Tamut ve'zachrut b'bhema ve'en tamut ve'zachrut be'ofot. And we have a beraita that supports this same idea, that even something that doesn't work, but it's a limb, and you remove it, that's still something significant. And here is from it by analogy to mum in birds and animals. We learn that tamut, meaning tamim, an animal has to have no blemish in order to be sacrificed, and zachrut, male or female, makes a difference in animals, right? Some korbanot have to be male and some have to be female. So those two laws apply apply to animals, but they do not apply to birds. Birds don't have all the laws of blemishes and unblemishes. You don't have to be so careful with the bird if it has this little blemish or that. And also, it doesn't matter if it's male or female. You could bring a female bird for anything. Now, Yachol Yavisha Gapah V'nikte'a Ragla V'nechteta Aina Tamud Omar Min Ha'of Elo Kol Ha'of. Now, we're still regarding a bird, even though we're not so particular in all the blemishes that apply to an animal. Still, if its wing is all dried, its leg is severed, its eye is removed, that's what we need. That would not be a good sacrifice, because the pasuk says, if you bring an offering from among the birds. That's a limiting word to mean that not any bird can you bring. If it has a minor blemish, that's okay. But if it has a major blemish, like it's missing an eye, then it's no good. What do we learn from here? That missing an eye is considered a major blemish. It's missing a limb. A bird has to have its limbs at least intact in order to be a kosher sacrifice. So from here we learn the same also with a slave, even if they're already blind, but now the master takes out his eye altogether, he goes free. Amar Rav Chia bar Asher Amar Rav Hayta lo yeteret v'chatacha ebed yoseh bahen lecherut. Amar Rav Huna v'hu shenisperet al gav hayad. Rav Chia bar Asher says in the name of Rav that if the slave had an extra finger, he has 6 fingers, right on his hand, 6 fingers, and the master cuts one off, he goes free. Even though, right, well, most people have 5 fingers, okay, but he had 6 fingers. He was born that way. So that's also a limb, and maybe it was useful, right? He could play piano better. So he goes free. That is considered injury. Rav Huna says, yeah, but that's only if you can count it on the back of the hand. If it's in line, it's over here, and so it's in line. Then it's called a finger, and so it's an extra finger, right? Good for him. But if it's not, if it's protruding from protruding from somewhere else, then that's not considered a finger. That's just a growth, and then you're doing him a favor by removing that growth. That's not called a limb. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.